The air in the alien marketplace was heavy with the smell of oil, smoke, and fear. Crowds of strange beings moved between stalls where everything could be bought metal. Weapons, stolen goods, even living creatures on a raised platform at the far end, a large iron cage waited, its bars blackened from years of holding the hopeless. Inside the cage stood a tall alien woman, her wrists bound by heavy chains. Her skin was pale gold. Her hair a dark silver that caught the light, but her eyes were dull and empty. The guards beside her laughed and pulled her forward. Dragging her into the center of the stage, the auctioneer, a fat alien with glowing red eyes, raised his voice. So the entire market could hear, lot number 73, female, strong build. Healthy organs perfect for the butcher's block, he shouted. The crowd roared with laughter. Throwing out cruel jokes and placing mock bets on how she would be cut, some shouted for her legs, others for her heart. The woman stood still. Her head bowed, not fighting, not speaking like someone who had already died inside. From the back of the market, a human named Kane stopped walking. He had been looking for spare ship parts. Not trouble, but when his eyes met hers, something froze inside him. Those eyes were not empty. They were screaming for help. Kane pushed through the crowd, ignoring the insults thrown his way. Humans were rare here, and most who came didn't get involved in alien affairs. The auctioneer started the bidding low, expecting no real interest. But then Kane's voice cut through the noise. 5,000 credits, he said calmly. The market went silent for a moment, then exploded in shouts. 5,000 was far more than her meat was worth. The auctioneer's smile widened. Profit was profit, but he still leaned forward. You know what she is. Human. She's not a worker, not a servant, she's food. The auctioneer sneered. Kane didn't blink. She's mine, he said. The gavel came down, and just like that, the woman's fate changed. The guards shoved her toward Kane, placing the chain in his hand. He could feel her trembling through the cold metal links. The crowd began to whisper, some angry, some amused. He's insane, one alien muttered. The Empire will kill him for this. Kane ignored them and walked away. Leading her through the narrow streets, the woman followed without resistance. Her steps slow when they reached a quiet corner away from the market. Kane stopped and unlocked her chains. You're free, he said simply. She looked at him for the first time, her golden eyes sharp and mistrusting. No one is free, she replied softly, her voice rough from thirst. Kane handed her a water flask, and after a long pause, she drank. What's your name? He asked. Lyra, she said, her tone flat as if the word meant nothing anymore. Kane nodded. Well, Lyra, I don't know what they've done to you, but you're not going back. Lyra laughed without humor. You don't understand. Once you're on the butcher's list, they don't stop until you're gone. Before Kane could answer, movement caught his eye. 2 armored soldiers from the ruling alien empire were watching them from across the street. They spoke into com devices, their faces cold and unreadable. Kane knew then being Lyra wasn't the end of her danger. It was the beginning of his. He placed a hand on his blaster. Looking at the soldiers without fear, Lyra's voice was almost a whisper. You should leave me here, human, before they decide you're worth killing too. Kane glanced at her, then back at the soldiers. Too late for that, he said, without another word. He took her hand not to drag her, but to lead her. They disappeared into the maze of streets as the soldiers began to follow. The market noise faded behind them, replaced by the heavy sound of their footsteps on metal ground. Kane didn't know why he had done it, why he had spent his savings on a stranger, but something told him this woman was more than she seemed, and he had the feeling that saving her was about to change everything. Kane moved fast through the back streets, keeping Lyra close behind him. The noise of the market faded, replaced by the hum of power lines and the hiss of steam from broken pipes. Lyra's steps were slow, her bare feet scraping against the metal ground. She did not complain, did not ask where they were going. She simply followed like someone walking toward another prison. Kane stopped beside a supply cart and bought a cloak. He wrapped it around her shoulders, hiding her pale golden skin from sight. She looked down at the fabric as if unsure why he had done it. It's harder for them to find you if they can't see you, Kane said. Lyra gave no answer, only pulled the hood lower over her face. They reached an abandoned building where Kane sometimes stayed between jobs. Inside, the walls were cracked and the air smelled of dust, but it was quiet. Kane set out a small box of emergency food rations. "Eat," he said, pushing one toward her. She stared at it for a long moment, then shook her head. "It's not poisoned," Kane added, half smiling. Her golden eyes lifted to meet his. And for the first time, there was a spark of something, maybe curiosity. Slowly, she took the ration and began to eat. Each bite small and careful. Kane sat across from her, leaning back against the wall. "So, Lyra," he began, "how does someone like you end up in a place like that market?" She chewed in silence, then said quietly, "War." Kane waited. "Knowing not to push, they came to my world," she continued. "The Empire. They took the cities first, then the villages. They said we could live if we served, but those they could not use. They sold as meat." Her voice broke on the last word, but she didn't cry. Kane clenched his jaw. "And your people didn't fight back?" "They fought," Lyra said, "and they died." She placed the half-eaten ration down. "I was not captured in battle. I was taken from my home at night, without warning, for a moment." The silence between them was heavy. Kane wanted to ask more, but movement outside caught his attention through a crack in the wall. He saw a shadow pass, 2, maybe 3 figures, moving slowly, watching the building. "Stay here," he said quickly, rising to his feet. He slipped out the back and climbed to the roof. From there, he could see them 2 soldiers from the Empire, the same ones from the market. And a third figure in a dark cloak, bounty hunter. Kane thought instantly. He climbed back down and grabbed his bag. "We have to move." Lyra looked up, startled. "Now?" "Yes, now," Kane said, already pulling her toward the back door. They moved through the alleys, avoiding open streets. Every sound seemed louder, the clatter of metal underfoot, the hiss of distant steam, even Lyra's breathing. Finally, they reached the edge of the district where the buildings thinned and the lights dimmed. Beyond this point lay the outlands, a dangerous stretch of wasteland few dared to cross. "This way," Kane said. Lyra stopped. "The outlands. That's death. Staying here is worse," Kane replied, for a long moment. She stared at him, then nodded. They slipped into the shadows beyond the last streetlight. The city slowly fading behind them. The ground changed from metal to dirt, then to cracked, dry earth. The air was cooler here, the wind carrying the smell of dust and old smoke. Kane kept scanning the horizon, watching for patrol lights. Lyra walked beside him now, not behind, her cloak pulled tight. After a while, she spoke. "You're different from the others." Kane glanced at her. "Others?" "Humans," she said. "I've met soldiers before. They saw me as a trophy or a burden." "Not worth saving," Kane shrugged. "I'm not a soldier anymore. Then why risk this?" She asked, her voice sharper now. "Why spend your money? Why fight the Empire for someone you don't know?" Kane's answer was simple. "Because you're not meat. You're a person." Lyra's steps slowed. And for the first time since he met her, she looked truly alive. Her eyes softened. But then a distant howl rose from the darkness ahead. Kane's hand went to his blaster. "We're not alone," he said. Shapes moved in the distance. Low to the ground, glowing eyes watching from the dark. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. "Raiders." Kane stepped forward, shielding her with his body. The wind carried the sound of footsteps, many of them closing in fast. Cain raised his weapon, his voice steady. "Stay behind me and don't run." Lyra gripped the edge of his cloak, the first hint of trust breaking through her fear. The night in the Outlands was about to turn into a fight for their lives. The wind howled across the cracked earth, carrying the scent of dust and danger. Cain stood with his blaster raised, his body slightly in front of Lyra. The glowing eyes in the darkness shifted, moving in a slow, circling pattern. They were not soldiers, not Empire patrols, these were Outland raiders. Half-wild scavengers who hunted anyone foolish enough to travel at night. Lyra gripped his cloak tighter, her voice low and tense. "There are more than 10 of them." Cain didn't take his eyes off the shadows. "Then we'll make them regret it." A shape lunged from the left, and Cain fired. The blaster's flash lighting up twisted faces painted in white ash. The raider fell, but 2 more replaced him instantly. Charging with crude blades, Cain stepped forward, shooting one and knocking the other back with a heavy punch, the air filled with shouts and the sound of feet pounding against the dry ground. "Move!" Cain shouted to Lyra, pushing her toward a cluster of jagged rocks. They ran, the raiders chasing close behind. Lyra's cloak caught on a stone, tearing, but she didn't stop. Cain fired over his shoulder, keening another attacker. The rocks gave way to a narrow path leading into a shallow canyon. The walls rose high on either side, and the shadows deepened. Cain knew it was risky if the raiders trapped them here. They would have nowhere to go, but it was better than being surrounded in the open. They moved deeper, their footsteps echoing in the tight space. The raiders followed, their calls bouncing off the stone. Lyra's breathing was ragged, but she kept pace. Cain glanced back and saw her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Up there, he pointed to a steep slope that led to a narrow ledge. They climbed, the loose rocks sliding under their feet. Cain reached the top first and pulled Lyra up after him. From here, they could see the mouth of the canyon and the figures pouring in. Cain aimed carefully and fired into the ground near the lead raider, sending dust and stone into his face. The attackers hesitated. Shouting in frustration, Cain used the moment to guide Lyra along the ledge to another path. The terrain here was rough and uneven, scattered with sharp stones and dry, brittle plants. The moonlight revealed a stretch of open land ahead, but it would give them distance. They ran again. Cain's senses sharp, every shadow a possible threat after what felt like hours. The shouts of the raiders faded behind them. Lyra slowed, her steps unsteady. Cain stopped and handed her his water flask. She drank, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "You fight like you've done this before," she said, her voice carrying a hint of respect. Cain gave a small shrug. "I've been in enough wars." Lyra looked at him in the pale light. "Then you know what the Empire will do when they find out you have me." "They already know," Cain replied simply. "And I'm still here, for the first time." Lyra's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. It was gone a moment later, replaced by something more serious. "My people." She began, then hesitated. "What about them?" Cain asked. "They had a queen," Lyra said slowly, "and when the Empire took her, they took hope from us too." Her eyes met his. "Steady now. I am her daughter." Cain stopped walking, the words sinking in. "That means you're the last princess." She finished. "And if I die, my people's bloodline dies with me." Cain exhaled, finally understanding why she was worth so much to the Empire, not just as meat, but as a symbol. "Then we can't let them have you," he said, his tone firm. They continued through the night, following the faint light of distant stars. The ground sloped downward, leading to a valley where the ruins of old buildings stood half buried in sand. Cain led her into one of the larger structures. The roof half collapsed, but the walls still strong. It was dry, sheltered, and hidden from view. They settled there. Kane keeping his blaster close. Lyra sat across from him, her cloak wrapped tight. After a long silence, she asked, "Why do you trust me?" Kane met her gaze. "I don't know if I do," he admitted. "But I know I won't hand you over." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if accepting his answer. Outside, the wind howled again, but here in the ruins, it was quiet. Kane knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would send more than raiders next time. And Lyra, the last princess of her people, was now his responsibility. Whether he had wanted it or not, the morning light crept into the ruined building, casting long shadows across the cracked floor. Kane was already awake, sitting near the doorway with his blaster resting on his knee. Lyra stirred under her torn cloak, her golden eyes blinking against the dim light. For a brief moment, there was peace, the kind that made Kane almost believe they were safe. That illusion broke when the sound of a distant engine reached his ears. It wasn't the rumble of a merchant cart or a civilian vehicle. This was sharper, faster, the sound of a patrol ship. Kane stepped outside, scanning the sky until he saw. It is sleek, black craft with the Empire's mark cutting across its hull. He ducked back inside. "We need to move." Lyra sat up quickly. "They've found us already." "Not yet," Kane replied. "But they will." They packed what little they had. Kane's movements fast and precise. Once they were on the move, he explained what he feared. When the Empire loses something they think belongs to them, they don't stop looking, he said, and with you. They're not just looking, they've put a price on your head. Lyra's steps slowed a bounty. Kane nodded grimly. One high enough to make even your friends think about betraying you. Lyra pulled the hood of her cloak lower, her voice a whisper. That means no one can be trusted. That's right, Kane said. So it's just us now. They left the valley and crossed a stretch of flat land baked by the sun. Kane kept them moving, avoiding open roads where bounty hunters might be watching. By midday, they reached a small smuggler's port, a cluster of low buildings, surrounded by fences made from scavenged ship parts. The air was thick with the smell of fuel and old metal. Ships of every size and shape sat in makeshift docking bays, their crews shouting in a mix of languages. This place is dangerous, Kane warned. But it's our best chance to get off-world. They slipped. Inside the port, keeping to the edges, Lyra walked close to him, her eyes scanning the strangers around them. In a corner of the docking yard, Kane spotted a freighter with human markings, a rare sight here. The pilot, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, stood beside it. Kane approached him quietly. I need passage out of the sector. The man eyed him, then looked at Lyra. She's with you. Kane's tone was firm. She is? The man hesitated, then named a price that made Kane's jaw tighten. Before Kane could answer, Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharp. We'll pay it. Kane shot her a look, but she ignored him. The pilot nodded. Dock for 20 minutes. As they walked away, Kane leaned close. You know, we don't have that much. I know, Lyra replied. But I also know men like him, he won't leave without collecting. So we have 20 minutes to find another way. They moved through the market stalls, Kane scanning for trouble. It didn't take long to find it. Two men in dark armor stood near a weapons stand, speaking into cum devices. Kane caught the words human, male, and female with golden skin. His stomach tightened. Bounty hunters. He and Lyra turned quickly down another path, but the men noticed. Stop. One of them shouted. Kane grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her into a narrow alley between two storage units. They ran, the sound of boots pounding the metal ground behind them. At the end of the alley, a shadow moved. A third man stepped into their path. His rifle already raised, Kane didn't hesitate, firing twice. The shots echoing through the port, the man dropped. But the noise had drawn attention. More footsteps, more shouts. Kane pushed Lyra through an open doorway, slamming it shut behind them. Inside, the room was dark, filled with crates and the smell of oil. They crouched low, Kane listening to the hunters search outside. Lyra's voice was a whisper. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," Kane replied. "Not until they have you or I kill every one of them." Her eyes widened, but there was no fear this time, only a strange light. "You would do that?" she asked. "Yes," Kane said simply. The footsteps outside moved away, but Kane knew it was only a matter of time before they circled back. He guided Lyra through the storage room to another exit. From there, they made their way toward the far end of the port, avoiding open areas when they reached Dock 4. The human pilot was already loading cargo. Kane walked up quickly. "Forget the price if you want to live. It'll take us now." The pilot frowned. "What's going on?" Kane didn't answer. He just looked over his shoulder. 3 armored hunters had just entered the dock, their weapons drawn. The pilot swore, "Get on." They ran up the ramp, Kane pulling Lyra inside as the ship's engines roared to life. The hunters fired, the shots slamming into the ramp, but the ship lifted away. Inside, Kane kept his hand on his blaster. His eyes on the door, Lyra sat across from him, her cloak falling open slightly to reveal her golden skin. She watched him with that same unreadable gaze. Finally, she said, "You've just made enemies across the galaxy." Human Kane met her eyes. "Then, I guess I'd better win." The freighter shuddered as it climbed through the planet's thin atmosphere. Inside the cargo bay, Kane sat with his back against a crate, his blaster resting across his knees. Lyra sat opposite him. Her hood lowered the golden tone of her skin glowing faintly in the dim light. For a while, neither spoke. The hum of the ship's engines filling the silence. Finally, the human pilot entered from the cockpit, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You weren't joking," he said to Kane. "I had bounty hunters on my scanners before we even left the dock." Kane didn't look up. "They'll keep coming." The pilot frowned. "Whatever she's worth, I hope you know what you're doing." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "I am. Not a thing to be priced." The pilot blinked, clearly unsure what to say, then left them alone. Kane turned his attention back to Lyra. "You're hurt," she shook her head. But he had already noticed the dark stains spreading along the side of her cloak. He moved closer, peeling the fabric away to reveal a long cut across her ribs. "It's nothing," she said, trying to push his hands away. Kane ignored her, pulling a small med kit from his bag. The wound wasn't deep, but it was bleeding steadily. He cleaned it with steady hands, wrapping a strip of clean cloth around her. Lyra winced, but didn't pull away again. When he finished, she looked at him differently. "In my culture," she began quietly, "if someone sheds blood to protect you owe them a life debt." Kane smirked faintly. "I'm not collecting debts." Her voice was calm, but firm. "This is not something that can be refused. It is a bond." Kane shook his head. "I'm not part of your culture." Lyra's golden eyes held his. "You are now," before he could answer. The ship jolted violently, throwing them both against the crates. The pilot's voice came over the comm. "We've got a problem, 2 ships on our tail. Closing." Fast, Kane stood, helping Lyra to her feet. "They followed us through the jump," Kane muttered. He headed for the cockpit, Lyra right behind him. The pilot was frantically adjusting controls. "They're locking weapons. What did you get me into?" Kane scanned the radar, then pointed to a cluster of small asteroids ahead. "Take us through there, lose them in the rocks." The pilot hesitated. "That's suicide." Kane's voice was steady. "So is staying here." The freighter plunged toward the asteroid field, jagged stones spinning past at deadly speed. The enemy ships followed, firing bursts of energy that lit up the darkness. Kane grabbed a side-mounted turret control and returned fire. Forcing one of the hunters to swerve, Lyra gripped the back of his seat. Bracing herself against the ship's violent turns, a shot grazed the freighter's hull, shaking the entire cabin. The pilot swore. "We can't take much more of this." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Then we finish it." He waited for the right moment, then fired at a massive rock above one of the pursuing ships. The asteroid cracked, sending debris crashing into the hunter's vessel. It spun out of control, slamming into another stone and exploding in a flash of fire. The second ship broke off, disappearing into the darkness. The pilot let out a shaky laugh. "Remind me never to doubt you again." They cleared the asteroid field and leveled out, the stars stretching endlessly before them. Kane returned to the cargo bay, finding Lyra sitting with her hands folded in her lap. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You risked your life again," she said softly. "That's the job," Kane replied. Lyra shook her head. "You still don't understand. Every time you do this, the bond grows stronger." Kane sighed, lowering himself onto a crate. "And what happens if I don't want that bond?" Lyra leaned forward slightly. "Then it still exists. It is older than any empire, older than the stars themselves." Her voice softened. "Where I come from, a life debt is more than gratitude, is a promise to stand beside you until death." Kane studied her for a long moment. "Sounds like a dangerous promise. For you, perhaps?" she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "But for me, it is the only promise I wish to make." The freighter's engines hummed steadily now, the danger temporarily behind them. Kane leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He didn't believe in fate, but he was starting to feel like this woman's presence in his life was no accident. And though he wouldn't say it aloud, the thought of facing the galaxy with her at his side didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a choice he had already made. The freighter descended into a world bathed in red light. From orbit, the planet looked burned, its surface cracked and dry. Lyra stood at the viewport, her golden eyes fixed on the land below. "This was once the heart of my people," she said softly. Kane glanced at her. "It doesn't look like much now." She shook her head. "The Empire stripped it of life, but under the ruins, the old places still remain." The ship touched down near the edge of a canyon, the wind carrying fine red dust that clung to everything. The pilot stayed behind to repair the ship, while Kane and Lyra set out on foot. The ground crunched under their boots, and every sound seemed too loud in the still air. Lyra led the way with a strange certainty, as if the land itself was guiding her. They reached a narrow pass between two jagged cliffs, the stone walls rising high above. "This path," Lyra said, "was once guarded by my family's soldiers. It leads to the palace." Kane raised an eyebrow. "Palace? I thought you said the Empire destroyed everything." "They destroyed the city," she replied. "But the palace was built to endure war. It still stands, though in ruins, as they emerged from the pass." Kane saw an immense structure, half buried in the canyon wall, its towers broken, but its central dome still standing. The air was cooler here, and Kane could hear the faint drip of water somewhere inside. They stepped through a massive archway, the carvings along the walls faded, but still showing scenes of battle and coronation. Lyra's steps slowed as she reached the main hall, her gaze falling on a throne made of black stone. Her voice trembled. "My father sat here the last time I saw him." Kane looked around cautiously, scanning the shadows. "Are you sure this place is safe?" he asked. "No," she admitted, "but it is ours." In the far corner of the hall, behind a fallen pillar, Lyra found a narrow passage hidden in the wall. "This leads to the royal vault," she explained. Kane followed her into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The passage ended in a sealed door covered in ancient symbols. Lyra placed her hand on a small circle in the center, and the stone began to shift with a deep rumble. The door slid open to reveal a chamber filled with dust and shadows. At the center, resting on a pedestal, was a crown of silver and black. Crystal, Cain stepped forward slowly, the light from his torch making the crown glimmer. Lyra approached it with reverence, her hands trembling. "This is the crown of my line," she whispered. "As long as it exists, my people have a claim to freedom." She lifted it carefully, the weight of it pulling her hands down slightly. When she turned to Cain, there was a fire in her eyes he had never seen before. "You helped me survive," she said. "But now, I will make my people live again." Before Cain could reply, a loud metallic echo rang through the hall above them. He froze, listening, voices dozens of them moving closer. Lyra's expression hardened. "The Empire has found us." They hurried back through the passage into the main hall. There, at the far end, stood a squad of armored soldiers, their rifles raised. Behind them, a tall figure in black armor stepped forward, an Imperial commander, his helmet shaped like a predator's skull. "Return the property of the Empire," the commander's voice boomed. "And you may live, human." Cain raised his blaster. "Not happening." The soldiers moved to surround them, their boots clanging on the stone floor. Lyra stepped up beside Cain, the crown still in her hands. She whispered, "If I put this on now, it will be a declaration they will know a queen still lives." Cain smirked faintly. "Then let's give them something to remember." She placed the crown on her head. The black crystal catching the faint light of the hall. Gasps rose from the soldiers, some hesitating. The commander's voice grew harsher. "Kill them both." Blaster fire erupted, the sound echoing through the ruined palace. Cain fired back, hitting 2 soldiers before they reached cover. Lyra darted behind a fallen pillar, calling out in her own language a cry of defiance that seemed to shake the hall itself. The fight was fierce, the air filled with smoke and the sharp smell of energy weapons. Through it all, Cain stayed close to Lyra, covering her from every angle. When the last soldier fell, only the commander remained, his black armor scorched. But unbroken, he pointed his blade at Cain. "You've cost me dearly, human." Cain stepped forward, his blaster low. "And I'm not done yet." The two clashed in a brutal fight, Cain using speed and precision against the commander's strength. Finally, with a sharp twist, Cain drove the butt of his blaster into the commander's helmet, sending him crashing to the ground. Lyra stood over him, the crown gleaming. Her voice was cold. "Tell your masters the queen has returned." The commander's glare burned into her, but he said nothing as Cain knocked him unconscious. They stood together in the ruined hall, the echoes of battle fading into silence. For the first time, Lyra didn't look like someone running from death. She looked like someone ready to claim a throne. The hall was silent, except for the faint crackle of smoke from broken weapons. Cain stood with his blaster lowered, his chest rising and falling from the fight. Lyra still wore the crown, its black crystal catching the dim light that filtered through the broken roof. She stepped toward him, her golden eyes never leaving his. "You bought me from death," she said quietly, "and now you have saved my throne." Cain shook his head. "I didn't do it for a throne." Lyra's voice was calm, but strong. "I know, but that is why you deserve it." She turned to face the few surviving loyalists who had emerged from the shadows of the palace during the battle. They knelt before her, murmuring words in her language. One of them glanced at Cain, his eyes questioning. Lyra raised her voice so all could hear. "This man is no servant. He is my shield, my equal." Cain frowned. "Equal? I'm just trying to get you out alive." She smiled faintly. "You have done more than that. You gave me back my life, my people, my hope." Before Cain could respond, the sound of distant ships echoed through the canyon. The loyalists looked uneasy, but Lyra held up her hand. "The Empire will come again, but they will find a queen waiting, not prey." She turned back to Cain. and I will not face them without you." Cain let out a slow breath. "You really think your people would accept a human at their side?" Lyra's eyes softened. "They will accept the one who bled for their queen." She stepped closer, so close he could feel the faint warmth of her skin. Her voice dropped to a whisper, meant only for him, Cain. "In my world, a life debt is more than a promise, is a bond of hearts, and I choose to seal it," before he could ask what she meant. She reached up and pressed her forehead lightly against his, a gesture that felt strange but deeply personal. The loyalists murmured in surprise, clearly recognizing the act. Lyra pulled back slightly, her smile faint but certain. "Now you are not just my protector, you are my mate in the eyes of my people." Cain blinked. "Mate? You could have warned me first." She laughed softly. "Would you have run?" He smirked. "No, probably not." Outside, the rumble of the approaching ships grew louder. Cain glanced toward the shattered archway. "We should be ready." Lyra nodded. "We will fight, but not as fugitives, as rulers, with the loyalists gathering weapons and preparing defenses." Cain found himself standing beside the black stone throne. It was strange to think that a few days ago he had been just another traveler passing through a hostile market. Now he was standing in the heart of a ruined palace, wearing dust and blood beside a woman who had been meant for slaughter but now wore a crown. Lyra stepped up to the throne and placed her hand on the armrest, then looked at Cain. In the old days, a queen did not sit alone, her chosen would stand beside her, share her burdens, and face her enemies. Cain crossed his arms. "Sounds like a dangerous job." Her lips curved. "You've already been doing it." The sound of engines roared above, and shadows of incoming ships passed over the cracked floor. Lyra's loyalists stood ready, their weapons aimed at the sky. Cain checked his blaster, feeling the familiar weight in his hand. Lyra looked at him one last time before the fight began. "If we live through this, will you stay?" Cain held her gaze. "If we live through this, you're stuck with me." A small smile touched her lips. "Then, let's live." The first blasts shook the palace walls, sending dust raining down from the high arches. Cain and Lyra moved together, side by side, firing at the soldiers who poured through the entrance. The battle was fierce and loud, but this time there was no retreat. No running. Every shot Cain fired, every command Lyra gave pushed the Empire back inch by inch. When the last invader fell, the hall was filled with the sound of heavy breathing and the faint hum of cooling weapons. Lyra stood in the center of the throne room, her crown still in place, her eyes fixed on Cain. She stepped toward him, reaching for his hand. "In my world," she said softly, "a queen chooses her king not by birth, but by deed." The loyalists watched in silence as she turned to face them all. "This man is the reason I stand here," she declared, "and from this day he will stand as my equal, your king." Cain felt the weight of 100 eyes on him, but all he saw was Lyra, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a wanderer without a place. He felt like he belonged. The hall echoed with the voices of the loyalists, chanting their queen's name. Then his. Above the ruins, the red sky seemed less empty. A butcher's victim had become a queen, and a human with nothing to his name had become her king, and together they would face whatever the galaxy dared to send.